My name is Isabella Reese. The first thing I felt was cold. Not heartbreak. Not humiliation. Not fear. Actual cold. Sharp December wind cutting through my silk dress, while snow slammed against my bare shoulders outside the front doors of the Reese estate. Behind me, $40 million worth of warm light glowed through towering glass windows. Inside, 73 wealthy guests stood beneath crystal chandeliers holding champagne glasses while Christmas music floated through hidden ceiling speakers. And my husband had just locked me out of the house. Welcome back to Revenge Story HQ, where family betrayal, hidden secrets, public humiliation, and emotional revenge stories unfold. If you love dramatic stories filled with manipulation, shocking twists, toxic rich families, and powerful comebacks, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below where you're watching from. Now, let's go back to the Christmas Eve dinner where my husband locked me outside in the snow in front of his entire family, without realizing the mansion was already legally in my name. Anna's mother was hiding a financial secret that was about to destroy their entire empire. The deadbolt clicked loudly enough for everyone near the entrance to hear it. Then came the laughter. Not loud laughter. Worse. The restrained kind wealthy people use when they want cruelty to feel elegant. Snow gathered against the marble steps while my fingers slowly went numb. I stared through the glass doors. Daniel Reese stood inside the foyer in a black tuxedo with one hand casually resting in his pocket, like he had not just thrown his wife into a snowstorm on Christmas Eve. Beside him, my mother-in-law Vivian slowly reached forward and closed the curtains. The guests near the piano turned toward the windows. Some looked uncomfortable. Others smiled into their wine glasses. One woman whispered something that made another guest choke on a laugh. The humiliation spread through the ballroom like perfume. Then Daniel picked up the microphone. The piano music faded. The room quieted. Even through the storm, I could hear his voice through the outdoor speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly, "apparently my wife has decided to create another scene tonight." A few nervous chuckles echoed through the ballroom. I stood frozen outside the doors while snow collected in my hair. My left heel had sunk into the icy stone pathway. Inside the house, someone handed Daniel another drink. He accepted it without taking his eyes off me. "You know," he continued, smiling faintly, "some people spend years pretending to belong somewhere they never really fit." Vivian lowered her eyes dramatically, like she was embarrassed for him. That performance almost impressed me. Almost. Because 20 minutes earlier, she had humiliated me in front of everyone at the Christmas dinner table. Again. But this time Daniel joined her. And that changed everything. The snowstorm worsened. Wind bent the pine trees, lining the driveway hard enough to make the branches groan. My hands shook violently now. Guests moved closer to the windows, watching. Nobody opened the door. Nobody told Daniel to stop. Nobody said my name. That was the thing about wealthy families. Cruelty becomes entertainment when enough money surrounds it. Daniel raised his champagne glass. "To family," he announced. The guests echoed the toast. "To family." I looked past the iron gates buried beneath snow. For 1 second, I almost cried. Then I remembered something my mother told me years ago while we stood in the freezing parking lot of our apartment building after our landlord illegally changed the locks during winter. Never let panic make your decisions. I inhaled slowly. The cold burned my lungs. Inside the ballroom, Vivian leaned toward Daniel and whispered something into his ear. He laughed. Then he said the sentence that finally killed my marriage. "Maybe now she'll understand this house was never really hers." I stared at him through the glass. At my husband. At the man who once held my hand in hospital waiting rooms. The man who used to kiss my forehead before work. The man humiliating me publicly for sport. And suddenly, I stopped feeling embarrassed. I started feeling calm. Very calm. Because what none of them knew was that the deed had already been transferred into my name 11 days earlier. And Daniel Reese had absolutely no idea. People think women like me come from nowhere. Like we simply appear one day inside wealthy families wearing the right dress and speaking softly enough to avoid attention. But women like me are built long before anyone notices us. I grew up in Rochester, New York. Not the polished suburbs with decorated porches and country clubs. The old side. The side with cracked sidewalks, laundromats open past midnight, and apartment radiators that sounded like dying engines every winter. My mother raised me alone. Her name was Helena Cross. During the day, she worked bookkeeping jobs for small businesses across Monroe County. At night, she studied accounting textbooks at our kitchen table while drinking burnt coffee from a chipped ceramic mug. I used to fall asleep listening to calculator buttons clicking through the apartment. Click, click, click. Numbers paid our rent. Numbers kept the lights on. Numbers eventually saved my life. But when I was 13, none of that mattered, because the landlord changed our locks 3 days before Christmas. I still remember the snow that night. Wet, heavy snow soaking through my sneakers while my mother stood perfectly still staring at the apartment door. The landlord kept repeating the same sentence. You people are 3 months behind. You people. My mother didn't argue, didn't scream, didn't beg. That frightened him more than anger would have. She calmly reached into her purse and asked for his full legal name. The landlord laughed. Big mistake. 2 weeks later, we moved back into the apartment after a court order forced him to reverse the illegal eviction. 3 months later, he paid my mother a settlement large enough to clear every debt we had. That night, after we carried our boxes back upstairs, my mother sat beside me on the floor eating grocery store soup from paper cups. Then she told me something I would remember for the rest of my life. Never let panic make your decisions. I looked at her. You weren't scared? She smiled faintly. Of course I was. Then why were you so calm? My mother stirred her soup slowly. Because calm people think clearly. And clear people survive. That was the first time I learned a calm woman could be more dangerous than an angry one. I didn't know it yet. But years later, that lesson would destroy the Reese family from the inside out. I met Daniel Reese at a charity fundraiser in Manhattan. He noticed me because I wasn't trying to impress anyone. That's what he told me later. You look comfortable around powerful people, he said during our second conversation. I laughed. I work in corporate auditing. Powerful people are usually the ones hiding the most. He stared at me for a second too long after that. Daniel was handsome in the effortless way wealthy men often are. Expensive watches, relaxed confidence, perfect teeth. The kind of man who never checked price tags because he never had to. At first, he felt safe, warm, attentive. He sent flowers to my office, remembered small details, called me during lunch breaks just to hear my voice. For 8 months, I believed I had found someone different. Then I met Vivian Reese. That should have been my warning. The first dinner took place at the Reese estate during autumn. Rain tapped softly against the giant dining room windows while staff members poured wine beside candlelight that probably cost more than my first apartment. Vivian welcomed me with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Isabella, she said warmly, Daniel tells me you work with numbers. Yes. How practical. The way she said practical somehow made it sound like an insult. Dinner lasted 3 hours. Every sentence from Vivian carried hidden teeth. So refreshing when people rise above their circumstances. You're very articulate. Daniel has always enjoyed rescuing people. Small comments. Tiny cuts. Just enough to leave bruises nobody else could see. Daniel noticed them. I know he did. Because every single time Vivian spoke, he looked down at his plate. Silent. That silence became the third person in our marriage. At dessert, Vivian lifted her wine glass and studied me carefully. Not everyone understands legacy, she said softly. The table went quiet. Daniel said nothing. His cousin Eleanor smiled awkwardly into her drink. A chandelier reflected in Vivian's diamonds while she continued speaking. Families like ours require compatibility. There it was. The warning. The rejection hidden inside politeness. I should have left then. Instead, I married him. And Daniel's silence would cost me 5 years of my life. People think emotional abuse arrives screaming. Sometimes it arrives wearing pearls. The humiliation started small. So small I almost convinced myself they were accidents. At our first Christmas together, every family member had personalized stockings hanging above the fireplace. Red velvet with embroidered gold names. Daniel, Vivian, Eleanor, Grandfather Thomas. Mine was plain white. No name. When I mentioned it quietly to Daniel later, he kissed my forehead and laughed. Mom probably forgot. She didn't forget. Vivian Reese forgot nothing. At family events, I was always seated slightly farther away. Not enough to cause a scene, just enough to send a message. Photos became another weapon. At parties, Vivian would call everyone together for pictures, then smile at me politely. "Oh, Isabella, would you mind taking this one?" Every single time. I existed inside the family, but never inside the frame. Then came the introductions. "This is Daniel's wife, Isabella. She comes from very humble beginnings." Vivian loved those words. Humble beginnings. As if poverty were a personality trait. At first, Daniel apologized afterward. "She doesn't mean anything by it." Later, he stopped apologizing entirely. That change happened slowly. Like watching snow cover a driveway one layer at a time. You don't notice the accumulation until suddenly everything is buried. 3 years into our marriage, Vivian hosted a charity gala at the estate. 200 guests. String quartet. Ice sculptures. Gold-trimmed champagne glasses. I spent 6 hours helping staff prepare floral arrangements because Vivian insisted I had such a practical touch. When dinner started, I discovered my seat had been placed beside the catering entrance. Not at Daniel's table. Not even near the family. A waiter accidentally bumped my chair twice carrying trays through the swinging kitchen doors. Across the ballroom, Vanessa Harper sat beside Daniel laughing at something he whispered into her ear. Vanessa, his ex-girlfriend. Vivian adored her. Of course she did. Vanessa came from old money, old schools, old family names. Women like Vanessa belonged in framed oil paintings above fireplaces. Women like me organized spreadsheets. That night, while guests danced beneath chandeliers, Vivian approached my table holding a champagne glass. "You know," she said sweetly, "some women are simply better suited for certain families." Then she smiled and walked away before I could respond. Daniel saw it happen. He did nothing. Again. That was the night something inside me changed permanently. Because humiliation only works when the victim still hopes for kindness. And I was starting to lose hope. Then I found the folder in Daniel's office. I found the folder on a Thursday night in October. Rain hammered softly against the office windows while the Reese estate slept upstairs beneath warm lighting and imported blankets. Daniel was in Boston for a finance conference. Vivian was hosting some charity board dinner downtown. For the first time in months, the house was quiet. I had gone into Daniel's office looking for printer paper. That was all. One stupid, ordinary moment. But life changes like that sometimes. Not with explosions. With folders. The drawer was partially open. Inside sat a thick black file stamped with silver lettering. Property transfer. Reese Estate Holdings. At first, I almost closed it. Marriage trains women to ignore their instincts. To avoid looking too closely. To protect peace even when peace no longer exists. But something felt wrong. Very wrong. I opened the folder. And my entire body went cold. The estate ownership documents were inside. Trust paperwork. Asset restructuring agreements. Transfer authorizations. And my name appeared over and over again beside legal terminology I recognized from years of corporate auditing. Except there was one problem. Daniel had been secretly trying to remove me from ownership protections tied to the estate. I sat down slowly in his leather office chair. Rain streaked down the windows behind me. The grandfather clock downstairs chimed midnight. My hands trembled while I turned the pages. Then I found the emails. Printed copies. One from Vivian. One sentence highlighted in yellow. "Once the transfer is complete, Isabella will have no legal claim to the property whatsoever." Another email. Daniel, stop hesitating. She's already become emotionally attached to things she never earned. I stared at the words until they blurred. Never earned. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of loyalty. 5 years of swallowing humiliation quietly just to preserve peace. And they were planning my removal like executives discussing furniture storage. But then, I noticed something strange. Page 14 was incomplete. A signature line remained blank. The final filing authorization had not been submitted. I leaned closer. My auditing instincts activated automatically. Cross-referencing dates, legal references, property code sections. Then suddenly, I understood. Daniel had accidentally created a loophole. A catastrophic one. The estate transfer structure temporarily placed shared authority into a legal gray area because of an unfinished refinancing process, which meant if certain documents were filed first, the property ownership could legally shift in my favor instead. My heart pounded, not from fear anymore, from clarity. That was the moment I realized something important. The Reese family thought I was weak because I stayed quiet. They confused silence with helplessness. Big mistake. Then the phone rang. I nearly jumped. Daniel's name flashed across the screen. For one terrifying second, I thought he somehow knew. I answered carefully. Hey. His voice sounded distracted. You still awake? Yes. You sound strange. I looked down at the documents spread across his desk.
I'm tired.
A pause. Then softer. Mom says you've been distant lately. There it was again. Not I noticed. Mom says. Always Vivian. Always her voice inside our marriage. I'm fine, I said. Daniel exhaled heavily. You know how she is. I almost laughed. Because no. I finally understood exactly how she was. And for the first time in years, I was done surviving inside their game. I was about to start playing my own. I met the attorney 3 days later in a quiet office building 20 minutes outside Manhattan. No dramatic music.
No cinematic speeches.
Just fluorescent lighting, stale coffee, and a woman named Margaret Holloway reading through property documents with terrifying focus. Margaret specialized in high-net-worth real estate disputes, which was apparently a polite legal phrase for wealthy families destroying each other. Rain tapped against the office windows while she reviewed the paperwork silently. I watched her expression carefully. 3 times, her eyebrows lifted slightly. That was enough to tell me Daniel had made a serious mistake. Finally, she closed the folder. Well, she said calmly, this is unexpectedly messy. I leaned forward. Messy for who? For your husband. My pulse quickened. Margaret rotated one document toward me. The refinancing process created a temporary transfer vulnerability. If these filings are completed in the correct order before the final trust amendment processes, ownership rights shift substantially in your favor.
Is zegt de Heer.
You're saying the house can legally become mine? Margaret nodded slowly. Yes. For a second, I couldn't speak. Outside the office window, traffic lights reflected off wet pavement while people hurried through the rain, completely unaware that my entire life had just changed. Margaret folded her hands. But, Isabella, if you do this, there's no going back. That sentence stayed with me, because she was right. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was war. I looked down at the documents again. Daniel's signatures. Vivian's legal instructions. The emails. The contempt. The humiliation. And suddenly I remembered every single moment they made me feel small. Every fake smile. Every exclusion. Every insult disguised as sophistication. People reveal themselves when they think you cannot leave. I looked back at Margaret. What do we need to do? The transfer process began quietly. Very quietly. That was the strange thing about life-altering decisions. Sometimes they happen in silence.
No explosions. No arguments.
Just signatures. Encrypted files.
Wire confirmations.
Late-night printing sounds while your husband sleeps upstairs believing he still controls everything. For 11 nights, I copied financial records onto encrypted drives. Tax filings. trust amendments, property restructuring emails, bank authorizations. The deeper I looked, the uglier things became. Vivian controlled everything. Daniel wasn't really a husband. He was an extension of her will. One night around 2 a.m., I sat alone in Daniel's office scanning documents while Christmas music played faintly downstairs from the automatic house speakers. The estate looked beautiful at night. Golden lights, towering staircases, imported artwork, expensive silence. But underneath all that beauty, something rotten was spreading through the foundation of the family itself. And I was starting to see it clearly. Then Margaret called me unexpectedly. Her voice sounded tense. "Isabella, there's another issue." My stomach tightened. "What kind of issue?" A pause. Then she said the sentence that changed everything again. "I thought the paperwork would save you." I was wrong. Vanessa Harper returned 2 weeks before Christmas. Not officially, not publicly, but women always know when another woman is being positioned nearby, especially when the family wants you replaced. The first sign came during brunch. Vivian hosted one of her enormous Sunday gatherings beneath crystal chandeliers while servers carried silver trays through the dining room. I arrived wearing a cream sweater dress Daniel once told me was his favorite. Vanessa was already there, sitting beside him, laughing. Her hand rested lightly against his arm while Vivian watched them with satisfaction glowing behind her wine glass. Nobody looked surprised to see her, which meant this had been happening for a while. Daniel stood quickly when he noticed me. "Isabella, I didn't know Mom invited Vanessa."
Lie.
"A terrible one." Vanessa smiled smoothly. "It's been forever." She hugged me lightly. Her perfume smelled expensive, calculated. The kind of perfume women wear when they want to leave fingerprints in the air after they walk away. Throughout brunch, Vivian orchestrated everything like a theater director. Vanessa seated beside Daniel. Vanessa included in old family stories. Vanessa laughing at private memories I wasn't part of. And every time I spoke, the conversation shifted away from me almost immediately. Social erasure.
Slow.
Intentional. Cruel. At one point, Vivian raised her champagne glass. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "some women are simply a better fit for certain families." Vanessa lowered her eyes modestly. Daniel stayed silent. Again, that silence hurt more than the insult itself. Because silence is agreement wearing a tuxedo. I excused myself halfway through dessert and walked toward the upstairs hallway. My chest felt tight. Not because of jealousy. Because suddenly everything made sense. The transfer documents. The emotional distancing. The public humiliations. They weren't just trying to control me anymore. They were preparing to replace me socially before the divorce even happened. I reached the upstairs landing when I heard voices from Daniel's office.
Vivian.
"Daniel." "Vanessa." The door wasn't fully closed. "You need to stop hesitating," Vivian whispered sharply. Daniel sounded exhausted. "She'll figure it out eventually. She already suspects something." A pause. Then Vanessa spoke softly. "She's smarter than you think." That sentence froze me. Vivian scoffed. Intelligent women still lose when emotions control them. I almost walked away. Then Daniel said something that hollowed me out completely. "I just want this over with." Not angry. Not emotional. Tired. Like I was paperwork. An inconvenience. 5 years of marriage reduced to exhaustion. I stood there in silence, while Christmas lights glowed softly across the upstairs hallway. That should have broken me. Instead, it woke me up. Because for the first time, I stopped hoping Daniel would choose me. And once hope dies, fear usually dies with it. Then Christmas Eve arrived. The Reese Christmas Eve dinner looked like something from a luxury magazine spread. Massive silver trees wrapped in white lights towered beside marble columns. Crystal chandeliers reflected gold across polished floors. A pianist played beside the fireplace, while servers carried champagne through rooms filled with old money and expensive laughter. Outside, snow fell heavily across the estate grounds. Inside, everything glowed. Beautiful things often hide ugly people. Vivian wore emerald velvet and diamonds. Daniel wore a black tuxedo tailored so perfectly it made him look untouchable. Vanessa arrived 30 minutes late in a white silk dress. Vivian kissed her cheek in front of everyone. "My dear, you look stunning." I stood 3 feet away holding a tray of champagne flutes because one of the servers had spilled wine earlier and Vivian insisted I help manage things. Help manage things. At my own Christmas dinner, the humiliation wasn't even subtle anymore. Guests smiled sympathetically at me throughout the evening, which somehow felt worse. Pity is just disrespect wearing softer clothes. Dinner began at 8. Long candlelit tables stretched beneath hanging crystal garlands while soft violin music echoed through the ballroom. I searched for my place card, then found it. Back corner, near the service doors. Again, not beside my husband, not beside family. Vanessa sat beside Daniel instead.
Of course she did.
I sat quietly while conversations flowed around me. Business acquisitions, vacation properties, charity auctions, old family stories I was never included in. Then Vivian stood slowly and lifted her champagne glass. The room quieted immediately. Vivian loved audiences. "Christmas," she began softly, "is about tradition, legacy, and protecting the values that hold families together." Several guests nodded. Daniel stared into his drink. Vivian continued. "Unfortunately, not everyone understands the sacrifices required to preserve great families." There it was. The performance. The attack disguised as elegance. Her eyes found mine across the ballroom. Some women marry into lives they could never build themselves. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others pretended not to notice. Vivian smiled sadly. And sometimes gratitude becomes entitlement. The silence that followed felt deliberate. Sharp.
Humiliating.
Then Daniel laughed quietly into his glass. That sound hurt more than her speech, because it confirmed something I had spent years trying not to believe.
He enjoyed this now.
Vivian turned toward Vanessa. Some women naturally understand grace, loyalty, and class. Vanessa lowered her eyes modestly. I watched several guests exchange glances. Everyone understood exactly what was happening. Nobody stopped it. Then Daniel stood up unexpectedly. My stomach dropped. He picked up the microphone near the piano. "Mom's right," he said casually. The room froze. She tried very hard to fit into this family.
Tried.
Past tense. Laughter scattered awkwardly across the ballroom. I felt heat rising into my face. Daniel smiled faintly toward the guests. "But eventually you realize some people are just more comfortable pretending than belonging." The room went dead silent. I stood slowly. My chair scraped softly against marble flooring.
Daniel looked at me.
Vivian looked pleased. Vanessa looked nervous now.
Good.
I placed my napkin carefully beside my plate. Then I walked toward the ballroom exit without saying a word. Behind me, Daniel's voice followed through the microphone. "There she goes again. Always dramatic." More nervous laughter. I reached the foyer. My coat hung beside the entrance. Snow hammered against the windows harder now. Behind me, footsteps approached quickly. "Daniel."
Drunk. Angry.
"Are you seriously doing this right now?" I turned toward him slowly. "What exactly am I doing, Daniel? You embarrass me constantly." I almost laughed at the insanity of that sentence. You humiliate me publicly, and somehow in the embarrassment.
His jaw tightened.
You never understood this family. No, I said quietly. I understood them perfectly. That sentence hit him harder than yelling would have. For 1 second, I saw something flicker behind his eyes.
Fear.
Then Vivian appeared behind him. Still elegant. Still composed. Still poisonous. "If Isabella wants to leave," Vivian said smoothly, "perhaps she should."
Daniel looked at me.
Then, at the guests watching from the ballroom entrance. And suddenly I realized something horrifying. He wanted an audience. Public humiliation had become part of the entertainment. Daniel opened the front doors violently. Freezing wind exploded through the foyer. "Then leave." I stared at him. Snow swirled across the marble steps outside. Daniel. But he was already pushing the doors wider. Guests gathered near the ballroom entrance, watching openly now. Nobody intervened. Nobody moved. Vivian folded her arms calmly. Vanessa looked pale. And then Daniel said the sentence that destroyed everything forever. This house was never yours anyway. Then he shoved me outside into the snow. The doors slammed shut behind me. And then I heard the deadbolt click. The deadbolt clicked behind me at exactly 11:43 p.m. Not slammed. Not forced.
Clicked. Calm.
Controlled. Intentional. That sound hurt worse than the humiliation. Snow crashed sideways across the estate lawn in violent, white waves while laughter continued inside the Reese mansion behind 30-foot windows glowing gold against the storm. Through the glass, I could still see the Christmas dinner. Crystal chandeliers. Waiters carrying champagne. Vivian Reese standing near the fireplace with one hand wrapped around a wine glass like she had just completed a performance. And Daniel was laughing. My husband had locked me outside on Christmas Eve while 200 guests watched. My fingers trembled against the frozen iron railing as snow collected in my hair and soaked through my coat. Nobody opened the door. Nobody stopped him. Nobody even looked uncomfortable anymore. That should have broken me. Instead, something inside me became very still. People think rage is loud. It isn't. The most dangerous anger arrives quietly. I stood there staring through the glass, while warm yellow light flickered across faces that had spent 5 years treating me like a tolerated inconvenience. Then Vivian walked toward the window. Slowly, elegantly. Her emerald silk gown shimmered under the chandelier light as she reached for the curtain. Our eyes met through the glass. Mine outside in the snow, hers inside beside the fire. And she smiled. Not a cruel smile. Worse. A satisfied one. Then she closed the curtains. The room disappeared. I was alone. The wind cut across my face hard enough to sting my eyes. My heels sank into snow as I walked down the front steps toward the driveway. The storm had swallowed the road almost completely. The Reese estate sat isolated on a private hill outside Albany, surrounded by pine trees and money. Too far to walk anywhere safely. Daniel knew that. That was the point. My phone buzzed. 3 texts. Daniel. Stop embarrassing yourself. Then another. Daniel. You always force people into scenes. Then finally. Daniel. Maybe this will teach you respect. I stared at the screen while snow collected across the cracked glass. 5 years. 5 years of shrinking myself to fit inside their version of acceptable. 5 years of apologizing for reactions instead of questioning abuse. 5 years of convincing myself Daniel was trapped between his mother and his wife.
No.
Daniel was not trapped. Weak men always look trapped when someone finally holds them accountable. I looked back at the mansion. Second-floor lights glowed softly through the storm. Warmth. Luxury. Music. The life I had spent years trying to earn. And suddenly, I did not want any of it anymore. My mother used to say something during difficult moments. Never let panic make your decisions. I could hear her voice clearly now.
Calm. Steady.
Like she was standing beside me in the snow. My frozen fingers unlocked my phone. Not Daniel. Not my mother. Not a friend. I called my attorney. 1 ring. Then, Ms. Reese? It happened, I said quietly.
Silence.
Then his voice changed instantly. Professional. Alert. Are you safe? He locked me outside. Another pause. Do you want to proceed? Snow whipped across my face. Inside the mansion, somebody started applauding. Maybe Vivian was giving another speech. Maybe Daniel was pretending nothing happened. Maybe Vanessa was sitting beside him now. I closed my eyes. Yes, I said. Good. My attorney replied calmly. Do not leave the property. What happens now?
A pause.
Then, now they learn whose house this really is. The wind nearly stole my breath. For the first time that night, I smiled, because 11 days earlier, While Daniel was busy humiliating me publicly, I had already become the legal owner of the estate. And none of them knew yet. Not Daniel. Not Vivian. Not Vanessa. Nobody. Another gust of snow hit hard enough to force me against the car. I climbed inside and locked the doors. My hands shook violently from cold as I turned on the heater. The dashboard clock glowed blue. 1:58 a.m. The mansion sat silent ahead of me now. Most guests had probably gone home. The party was over. But the real destruction had not even started. Then my phone buzzed again. This time from Vivian. Vivian, do not create more drama tonight. Then another message. Vivian, you are still embarrassing this family.
Family.
The word almost made me laugh. People reveal themselves when they think you cannot leave. I set the phone down. Outside, snow buried the long driveway inch by inch. Then, at exactly 2:14 a.m., headlights appeared through the storm. The black SUV moved slowly through the snow like something out of a courtroom drama. Its headlights cut across the frozen driveway before stopping directly behind my car. The driver's door opened first. Then the sheriff deputy stepped out. Daniel had locked me out of the house. Now law enforcement was walking back in with me. The irony almost felt poetic. My attorney emerged next, adjusting his scarf against the storm while carrying a leather portfolio under one arm. He knocked once on my window. You ready? I looked at the mansion. At the glowing windows. At the home I had cried inside. Begged inside. Shrunk myself inside. Then I opened the car door. Snow crunched beneath our shoes as we walked toward the entrance together. The deputy rang the bell. 30 seconds passed. Then footsteps. The door opened violently. Vivian stood there wrapped in cream-colored cashmere. Her expression collapsed the second she saw the deputy. What is this? Her eyes landed on my attorney, then on me, still covered in snow, still calm. And suddenly, she looked nervous.
Good.
The deputy spoke first. Ma'am, we're here regarding a property dispute. Vivian laughed immediately.
Sharp.
Dismissive. There is no dispute. She does not live here anymore. My attorney opened the leather portfolio. Yes, he said evenly. She does. He handed over the documents. Vivian's smile faded while she read. Her eyes moved once.
Twice.
Then froze.
No.
The word barely came out. Behind her, footsteps echoed across marble floors. Daniel appeared near the staircase, wearing an untucked dress shirt with whiskey still in his hand. What's going on? Then he saw me. His face hardened instantly. You need to leave. The deputy turned toward him calmly. Sir, legally, she has every right to enter this home. Daniel laughed drunkenly. No, she doesn't. My attorney spoke carefully. Actually, she does. Then he delivered the sentence that destroyed the entire night. 11 days ago, ownership of this property was legally transferred solely into Isabella Reese's name. Silence.
Pure silence.
Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Daniel blinked slowly. Vivian looked physically ill. That's impossible, Daniel whispered. No, my attorney replied. It's recorded with the county. Daniel grabbed the paperwork violently. His eyes scanned the signatures. Then the filing stamps. Then the transfer authorization. His face drained completely, because he recognized his own signature. Months earlier, Daniel had signed preliminary restructuring documents without reading them carefully during one of Vivian's tax adjustment schemes. They thought they were protecting assets. Instead, they handed everything to me. A loophole. One careless mistake by arrogant people convinced nobody else could outsmart them. Vivian stepped toward me trembling. You planned this. No, I said quietly. You planned this. The deputy cleared his throat. Sir, ma'am, legally, Mrs. Reese can enter this property. You cannot deny access. Daniel stared at me like he no longer recognized the woman he married, because for the first time, I was not asking for permission anymore. I walked past them into the mansion. Warm air wrapped around me instantly. The enormous Christmas tree still glowed beside the staircase. Half-empty champagne glasses sat abandoned throughout the ballroom, evidence of a party that had died hours ago. My wet shoes crossed marble floors slowly. Vivian followed behind me, breathing harder now. This is fraud. No, my attorney corrected. This is negligence. Daniel sank onto the staircase, still staring at the paperwork, still trying to understand how control disappeared overnight. But I was no longer watching him, because something else had caught my attention. Near Vivian's office door sat 3 banker boxes, unsealed, one partially open, and inside, I saw account statements,
Wire transfers.
charity documents. Something shifted instantly in my stomach. My compliance instincts activated before my emotions did, because I recognized those numbers. Large movements, repeated withdrawals, hidden entities. My attorney noticed my expression immediately. What is it? I walked toward the boxes slowly. Vivian stepped forward fast. Don't touch those. Too late. I already had. And what I found inside was far worse than infidelity. The first document I pulled from the box was a transfer summary for the Reese Family Foundation. At first glance, it looked normal. Charity distributions, operational expenses, seasonal donations. But numbers tell stories. And these numbers were screaming. I scanned 3 pages silently while Daniel stood behind me, still drunk and confused. Then I saw it. Repeated wire transfers to shell consulting firms. Luxury expenditures hidden under humanitarian categories. Offshore accounts. My stomach dropped. How long has this been happening? I asked quietly. Vivian's face turned cold instantly. Put those down. That answer told me everything. I kept reading. More hidden transfers. Fake vendors. Missing funds. And then the final page. Debt notices. Massive ones. The Reese empire was drowning. I looked up slowly. You're bankrupt. Daniel's head snapped toward his mother.
What?
Vivian ignored him. This is none of your business. I almost laughed. Your fraud became my business when you transferred the estate into my name while hiding financial liabilities. Daniel stumbled forward. Mom, what is she talking about? Vivian's silence lasted too long. That was all the confirmation he needed. The room changed instantly. You could feel it. The illusion cracked. For years, Daniel believed his mother controlled everything because she was powerful. But power built on secrets eventually collapses under its own weight. My attorney stepped beside me, reviewing the paperwork carefully. His expression darkened more with every page.
Jesus.
Daniel grabbed one stack from the table. Why are there overdue notices? Vivian snapped instantly. Because your father left me a disaster. There's over $12 million missing. That's enough. Her scream echoed through the mansion. But nobody looked intimidated anymore. Fear loses power once truth enters the room. I kept flipping pages. Then I found the charity audits. Manipulated reporting. Fabricated expenses. Unregistered accounts. And suddenly I understood why Vivian controlled everyone so aggressively. She wasn't protecting wealth. She was hiding collapse. Every humiliation. Every manipulation. Every obsession with image. It was all desperation. The perfect family. The perfect estate. The perfect legacy. All financed by lies. Daniel sat down slowly on the staircase again. You said everything was fine. Vivian looked at him with something close to hatred. Because somebody in this family needed to stay functional. Then her eyes moved toward me. This is your fault.
Især herkommelig.
No, I said softly. It was already broken before I arrived. That sentence hit harder than yelling ever could. The mansion suddenly felt different now. Smaller. Colder. The giant chandeliers. The marble floors. The expensive paintings. All of it felt fragile. Like stage props after performance ends. My attorney closed the final folder carefully. We need to report this. Vivian's entire body stiffened. You wouldn't dare. I met her eyes. A calm woman is a dangerous woman. Then I picked up my phone and made the call. By morning, the FBI was involved. The scandal exploded before sunrise. By 8 a.m., news vans lined the bottom of the Reese estate driveway. By noon, the Reese Family Foundation website had been shut down. By evening, Vivian Reese was trending online beside words like fraud investigation, financial misconduct, and charity abuse. The perfect family finally looked exactly like what it had always been underneath.
Corrupt.
Daniel spent the first 48 hours trying to save everything at once. The estate,
The accounts.
his reputation, Vanessa, especially Vanessa. But money reveals truth faster than betrayal does. The moment federal investigators froze major accounts, Vanessa disappeared.
No budwie. No explanation.
Just silence. Daniel called her 17 times in one night. She never answered, because some people only love luxury. And the second luxury disappears.
So do they.
Meanwhile, federal agents moved through the mansion room by room cataloging financial records while Vivian followed them in stunned silence, wearing cashmere-like armor that no longer worked. I watched most of it from the upstairs landing. Not emotional anymore, just tired. The dining room looked especially haunting during the investigation. Half-packed boxes stacked beside the walls. Christmas decorations still hanging. Red ribbon draped across furniture no one could afford to keep. The giant chandelier above the table flickered slightly, while agents photographed documents beneath it. Power, without character, eventually destroys itself. I finally understood that completely. 3 days later, Vivian lost her position on 3 charity boards. A week later, creditors filed claims against remaining estate assets. 2 weeks later, the mansion officially entered seizure review. Daniel started drinking heavily. Not dramatically. Quietly. The saddest kind. One night, I found him sitting alone in the dark kitchen staring at nothing. "You knew," he said eventually. "Knew what?" "That my mother was destroying everything." I leaned against the doorway. "No, Daniel. I knew she was destroying me." He looked older suddenly. Smaller. Weak men always shrink once strong women stop carrying them emotionally. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I believed him. That was the tragedy. Cruelty does not always come from evil people. Sometimes it comes from weak people who choose comfort over courage again and again until they become unrecognizable. I left the mansion officially 11 days later.
No screaming. No dramatic goodbye.
Just signatures. Boxes. Silence. Vivian watched from the dining room window while movers carried out my things. For once, she had nothing to say. And somehow that felt sadder than all her insults combined. 3 months later, I opened the letter. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a narrow kitchen with old wooden cabinets, and a window overlooking snow-covered rooftops. And I loved it instantly.
No chandeliers. No marble floors. No performances.
Just peace. Real peace. The kind that feels unfamiliar after years of surviving emotional warfare. 3 months after leaving the estate, I started my new position as Financial Compliance Director for a healthcare nonprofit in Rochester. Ironically, the promotion paid more than anything Daniel ever earned. I spent my evenings quietly now.
Books.
Silence.
Healing.
And slowly, I started recognizing myself again. On Christmas Eve the following year, snow fell softly outside my apartment window while my mother stirred soup at the stove wearing fuzzy slippers and an oversized sweater.
No guests. No speeches. No humiliation.
Just warmth. Real warmth. We ate dinner at a tiny wooden table beside the kitchen window while soft jazz played from her phone speaker. At one point she looked at me carefully and asked, "How do you feel?" I thought about the mansion, the snowstorm, the locked door, Vivian closing the curtains, Daniel humiliating me through a microphone. Then I looked around my little apartment, at the soft yellow lighting, the chipped coffee mugs, the peaceful silence. And I answered honestly, safe. My mother smiled quietly. That night after dinner, I opened the final letter resting on the kitchen counter. Not from Daniel. Not from Vivian. From the sheriff deputy who arrived that night. Inside was a handwritten note. You handled yourself with dignity during one of the cruelest situations I've ever witnessed. Most people break publicly after humiliation. You didn't. That takes strength. I folded the letter carefully. Then I placed it beside the others I had kept during the divorce. Not as reminders of pain, as reminders of survival. Outside, snow continued falling softly beneath streetlights. My mother carried 2 mugs of tea toward the table. And suddenly I understood something important. I never actually wanted the mansion. I wanted respect, love, safety, belonging. But those things cannot grow inside places built on control. I stopped begging for seats at tables built to humiliate me. And for the first time in years, I finally felt warm,